What common skill starts to seem suspicious if you're exceptionally good at it? Story 1. A few years ago, at my new job, a coworker locked her keys in her car. I managed to get the door open in under a minute, much to the amazement and concern of the security guard who was watching. He couldn't believe how quickly I had done it without causing any damage. What he didn't realize was that I had learned this trick from my first car, a two-door sports car with a known design flaw. I had locked my keys in the ignition so many times that I became an expert at exploiting that flaw. My coworker had a similar car and had made the same mistake, so I used my knowledge to help her out. Even though it wasn't exactly an everyday skill, it was definitely the most suspicious-looking one I had. Story 2. I've developed a talent for gathering detailed information from my peripheral vision. I don't need to look directly at someone to study them, which sounds a bit creepy, but has been a valuable skill. I honed this ability due to living and working in environments where openly watching people could have serious consequences. Yet being unaware of their actions was equally dangerous. It's also handy in everyday situations. Plus, being able to read upside down has had its benefits too. It's a unique skill set. And while it might make me seem like a bit of a perv, it's all about survival and staying aware of my surroundings. Story 3. Working in customer service has its perks, especially when it comes to remembering regular customers' orders. I can spot a regular pulling up and have their order ready by the time they reach the window. It's funny though, because my memory for childhood events or even what happened in the last few weeks is absolute garbage. When I was young, typing was a real struggle because of my short fingers. But now, I can type incredibly fast, around 80 to 100 words per minute, and I've gotten countless comments on it. My only fear is developing arthritis in my hands, which might slow me down. All right, a little flex here. My typing speed averages around 120 words per minute. I need that optimal speed to roast people in League of Legends and still not miss my minions, you know? Typing fast is fun, even if it's not particularly suspicious. People do get interested in it, though. Once, the course director for a gig I was working on wanted to see me type because he'd heard I was fast. Story 4. When I took over the reporting duties for my colleagues, I quickly realized how much time they were wasting. They spent hours copying and pasting hundreds of cells every day. Being a bit of an Excel wizard, I decided to automate the process. I spent a few hours setting up a system that would pull data from the database and complete the task in seconds. All I had to do was press a button and I was done. Initially, I released the reports immediately, often with a script that would open, refresh, save, and email them. But my efficiency raised suspicions. People started questioning the accuracy of the data because it was ready too quickly. To allay their concerns, I began holding off on releasing the reports, sometimes even delaying them deliberately. A lot of trial and error went into my Excel expertise. Being in my mid-50s, I've had plenty of time to learn. Knowing basic programming languages like BASIC, Pascal, and Fortran helped, but Visual Basic for Applications, VBA, in Excel proved the most useful. Recording macros and learning functions like VLOOKUPs were game changers. Despite the initial suspicion, I maintained that my method was sound. Now, I just had to time my efficiency to fit others' expectations. Story 5. Getting tested for strep throat had become second nature to me by the time I reached my 20s. As a kid, I had it frequently, so I was well acquainted with the procedure. They'd stick a big popsicle stick in my mouth to hold down my tongue and then swab the back of my throat while I tried not to gag. One particular day, I found myself in the office of a relatively new, young, and attractive doctor. As he prepared to swab my throat, I braced myself for the usual discomfort. But this time, it went smoothly, and I didn't even flinch. Impressed, the doctor complimented me, saying, "You did well on the test, no gagging at all." Without thinking, I responded, "Thanks, I've had practice." It took me a moment to realize the unintended implication of what I'd just said. The look on his face was a mixture of curiosity and awkward amusement. If not outright suspicious, my comment was definitely more revealing than I had intended. Story 6. I have an uncannily strong sense of smell, so much so that I can go to the bathroom at school or work and identify who was there based on the products they use to freshen up. Once, I was walking down the main street in Ginza and smelled someone I had met 6 months ago before I even turned around to see them walking behind me. I can also predict if it's going to snow based on how the air smells. Twice, I said in the middle of June, "Weird, it smells like snow." and twice there was a freak snowstorm overnight. The people who laughed at me initially gave me weird stares when they saw everything covered in a fresh layer of snow the next day. I guess it makes me seem like some kind of voodoo witch. Moreover, I can tell how many hours it's been since your last meal or who you met before me just based on scent. This is why it's nearly impossible to cheat on me. It's a genuine superpower, akin to what a dog might have, giving me insights that most people can't even fathom. Of all the abilities we've discussed, I think this is the coolest one. Knowing if people have eaten or if it's going to snow just from the scent in the air, that's straight up amazing. Story 7. I don't know if it's an everyday skill, but gardening is something I excel at. Every old fart on my block admires my flowers and then proceeds to tell me they'll call the police if they see me growing pot. Old people are bold as hell. Like, "Sir, I'm a psychopath. Don't piss me off or you'll become fertilizer for my flowers." One old guy said if I did grow pot, he wouldn't call the cops, only if I shared it with him. Good deal, Jerry, but for the last time I don't. My yard is a butterfly garden, for Pete's sake, and growing flowers is my therapy. Please get off my lawn or become a part of it. The whole becoming fertilizer thing was supposed to be a joke, but I can see why it might be a bit concerning. Story 8. Growing up with a strict father, I learned how to be sneaky and hide my true self. Until I was 16, I appeared calm, collected, and submissive in front of my dad. In reality, I was just concealing my true nature until certain lines were crossed and I became rebellious. While I'm not claiming to be a super spy, I've developed some skills that seem normal if you know how to do them, but often raise eyebrows when I put them into practice. First, picking locks. Sure, many people can pick a simple or cheap lock, but knowing how to open an electric lock, a magnetic security pad, or even using the old sound pressure method to crack a code lock, where you listen closely and manipulate the lock by sound, often gets me suspicious looks. Second, moving quietly and reducing visibility. Many people think they can be stealthy, but they overlook things like their breathing or the sound of their clothing. I've mastered the art of moving silently, understanding where shadows fall, including my own, and even controlling my breath to be long, slow, and soft. Third, learning someone's patterns, not just their schedules, but also the things that might make them deviate from their routines. This skill isn't just useful for being sneaky, it can make you a better friend. Noticing changes in someone's behavior can help you intervene if something's wrong in their life. However, it's important to be careful when you start seeing other people's lives through the little windows they give you and accurately piecing things together. Lastly, my favorite, double talk. Because of my father, I get bad anxiety from lying, so I don't lie, period. Instead, I skirt the truth. I might give an adjacent answer that changes the initial question, imply an answer where none is to be had, or slowly change the subject. I might answer with a question, tell a long-winded story as an answer, or over-clarify. It's incredibly satisfying to get out of trouble. Not because I lied, but because I slipped away without directly answering. Though I still feel guilty, no matter how minor the issue. Learning these skills has given me a unique perspective and a set of abilities that often raise questions, but they've also taught me a lot about human behavior and interaction. Story 9. I have a knack for picking up random details in conversations, even ones I'm not directly involved in. I'll wish someone good luck on their presentation, remember birthdays, and remind people of important dates or tasks. This ability has saved me and those around me from many sticky situations. Imagine being the guy at work who reminds you of your wife's birthday next week. That's me. My ADHD taught me to remember the things I pay attention to, and it has become a helpful, if slightly uncanny skill. Story 10. We had this drinking game where we'd take a paper bag, place it upright on the floor, and try to grab it with our teeth while standing on one foot. Each round, we'd trim a few centimeters off the top of the bag, making it progressively harder to reach. One of my friends, who wasn't particularly athletic, always won. He had this uncanny flexibility, able to grab the bag even when it was only 6 inches off the ground. People were super impressed. I joked, "It's all that practice from sucking yourself off." The look he gave me, paired with an awkward laugh, made me wonder if I had struck closer to the truth than I intended. Story 11. As a veterinarian, I've become accustomed to being up to my elbows in all manner of bodies, parts, and fluids. Blood and guts are just part of my daily routine. I can watch surgery or necropsy videos over lunch without batting an eye. One Tuesday, I performed an eye surgery that went smoothly, but the new kid in the clinic nearly fainted. The bigger staff members aren't allowed to get squeamish. It's simply too inconvenient. A few days later, I was at the bank when the teller noticed a stain on my shirt. "Oh my God, there's blood on your shirt," she exclaimed. Without thinking, I reassured her, "Don't worry, it's not my blood." Her face turned pale, and I realized too late that my words didn't offer the comfort I intended. Instead of allaying her fears, I had only made myself seem more suspicious. It's moments like these that remind me how differently the world outside the clinic views my everyday normal. Story 12. One day, I told my friend that I was getting a job at a store we both knew. She casually mentioned, "I think I've been there before." Without missing a beat, I replied, "You have. We actually talked about it last year when you mentioned buying that blue sweater on sale there." As I repeated the conversation we had, word for word, I noticed her eyes widening with a mix of surprise and unease. The more I recalled details she had long forgotten, the weirder her looks became. It was as if my perfect memory was a superpower she didn't know how to handle. Story 13. I have a friend who is incredibly attuned to reading body language. He can anticipate your actions before you even think of them. The first time he pulled this trick on me, I was about to look for the remote. Just as I was about to get up, he handed it to me without me even saying a word. It seemed cool at the time, but a few weeks later, we were eating out together, and I couldn't decide between two dishes. I hadn't mentioned which dishes I was considering, yet he told me, "Get dish B." It was almost like he was psychic. His ability to read people is both fascinating and a bit eerie. Story 14. As a kid, we had these bluebonnet books we could read for prizes if we scored well on comprehension tests. One day, my teacher accused me of cheating because I was reading them too fast. To prove her point, she sent me to the library and had the librarian watch me while I read one of the books. Afterward, the librarian administered the test, and I aced it. I got to enjoy a brief moment of smug satisfaction when the librarian reported my perfect score. However, my teacher still lectured me about how long-term comprehension doesn't happen when you speed read and how I shouldn't just be reading for the prizes. The next year, in third grade, my new teacher took a different approach. Instead of being suspicious, she tested my reading level, and I scored at a ninth grade level. She inquired about GT, gifted and talented classes, and discovered that I had been misplaced after a move. Once I was placed back into GT, the difference in how teachers treated me was like night and day. It was a valuable lesson in bias and the importance of giving kids the benefit of the doubt. Story 15. I can almost always tell which way is north, enabling me to navigate to anywhere I've been just once by following where I think it should be. My mind has a decent map, and I can also count both quickly and accurately. This might mean that on some subconscious level, I'm measuring travel distances naturally. However, this ability doesn't help much because I'm terrible with names. So when someone says, "Oh, you mean that cool bar on Broadway?" it means nothing to me until we get there. And then I remember, "Oh, I hate this place." Despite my internal compass and natural sense of direction, my poor memory for names often leads to mixed-up destinations. Story 16. Working hard might not sound like an unusual skill, but in my line of work, it sets you apart. I build roads for a living from beginning to end. Some days are tough, especially when it's hot, and we're slip paving over 2,000 yards of concrete. It can be fairly physical, and at 43, I make it a point to outwork everyone else. I do a lot of the thinking as well, but I try not to let those 18 to 20-year-olds outwork me physically. If they do manage to outwork me, I gain respect for them. As a leader, I also try to be upbeat and energetic, so I think they probably assume I'm on something. Working hard is more than just a skill. It's a mindset that drives me every day. Story 17. From a very young age, I could read extremely fast while maintaining good comprehension. Despite this, I often faced doubt and skepticism from my teachers, who believed I was rushing through the material without truly understanding it. It was frustrating having to constantly defend my abilities. Fortunately, my parents always supported me. They had seen enough evidence at home to know I was telling the truth. What surprised me the most was how inflexible teachers' perceptions of kids could be. If a student did something that seemed impossible to the teacher, like reading quickly with full comprehension, the assumption was that the student was doing it wrong. Granted, most of the time the teachers were right, but extraordinary kids do exist. Story 18. Growing up in a somewhat abusive household, I developed a keen ability to read micro-expressions and observe other people's behavior and body language. I can gauge someone's mood before even talking to them, tell when they're lying, and sense when situations are about to go south. A friend once called me sneaky because I notice everything around me, even if it looks like I'm not paying attention. My shrink calls it being hypervigilant. I call it being quietly observant. Story 19. I have an uncanny ability to spot cops and people who are up to something. I can scan a street and within 5 seconds tell you about the 2 undercover guys watching the dealer on the corner and pinpoint where his runner is. I can see the guys with probably outstanding warrants avoiding the uniforms, the escort talking to the guy parked halfway up the street, and the other guy cruising around looking for his dealer. It all comes together in a snapshot. Most people can get about half of it if they observe for a while, but I've learned not to talk about it. People who don't know me often think I've been part of that game. Story 20. Getting people to open up to me is something I stumbled upon, almost by accident. I might be a bit socially awkward, but I discovered that simply asking someone questions about themselves can get them talking for hours. I do this frequently and have ended up knowing more about some acquaintances than their own families do. Sometimes I get the feeling people suspect I'm trying to get information out of them, but they still talk endlessly about their goals, fears, childhood, work secrets, and deeply personal stuff. My guess is that most people don't often get the chance to pour out their souls to someone, but I will gladly sit there and listen. Story 21. My grandpa was like a magician when it came to finding parking spots. No matter how crowded a place was, he always found a front row spot. Even if people were parking out on the grass, he'd drive up to the front and, like clockwork, someone would pull out of their spot just as he arrived. It was like magic. Sadly, this incredible ability wasn't passed down to any of us. It matches well with my grandma's green thumb. She's absolutely a fae when it comes to plants. No matter the plant type or the weather, her garden is always perfect. Her plants bloom early and keep blooming longer than they should. We had an ice storm last winter that damaged so many trees around her house, but not hers. Her trees remained perfectly intact. While neither of these abilities is particularly suspicious, they are certainly magical in their own way. I'd love to have my grandpa's parking magic, but my grandma's green thumb is undoubtedly more enchanting. Story 22. My friends and I used to hang out at an incredibly cluttered warehouse that belonged to our hoarder friend. This place was a labyrinth of piled up junk, so packed that moving without getting stuck or triggering a garbage avalanche seemed impossible. But somehow, I could glide through those hills of hoarded trash like a ghost. I'd slip through tight spaces and navigate around precariously balanced heaps without making a sound. My friends watched me with a mix of awe and discomfort, eventually telling me it was downright creepy how effortlessly I moved through that chaos. Story 23. Growing up on a ranch, you learn the importance of disposing of animal carcasses without attracting scavengers or predators. Knowing the proper way to bury or dispose of a body is a vital skill. I've had a few weird looks when watching crime shows, pointing out what they did wrong in disposing of bodies. Ranching also taught me how to quickly skin, clean, quarter, and butcher a carcass. During these shows, I've learned to keep my comments to myself. My expertise in this area is practical and necessary for ranch life, but it can definitely make people uncomfortable if they hear too much detail. Story 24. One of my old coworkers, who was my partner on the ambulance, surprised me one day when she spoke fluent Chinese with a patient and their family. In China, this would be no big deal, but we were in Ohio, and I had no idea she knew any language other than English. She acted like it was completely normal. Yeah, everyone knows Mandarin now, don't you?" she joked, leaving me baffled and impressed. Story 25. This might sound weird, but apparently not being a creep is a skill. I met a girl online who shared my love for space. We hit it off, but then she stopped talking to me for a while. Eventually, we became good friends, and when I asked her why she ghosted me for a few months, she said she thought I was in a relationship and hiding it. The reasons she listed were: 1. I didn't flirt with her at all. 2. I didn't ask for her WhatsApp. 3. I didn't ask her to meet me. 4. I didn't send her unsolicited images or try intimately texting her. She thought it was too weird for a guy to start talking and not do any of these things. Apparently, the standards are far too low for men. Not that I was actually interested in her that way. I just wanted to talk about space with someone. Anyone. Story 26. I've always had an uncanny ability for spatial awareness. I can look at an object and instantly tell if it will fit in a particular space, whether it's a wall, a box, a car, a hallway, or a stairwell. A few months ago, I was at a shipping store when a guy behind me in line was struggling to find the right box size for his item. Without hesitating, I pointed to a specific box and said, "That one, but only if you put your box in this side up." He followed my suggestion, and it slid in perfectly. He gave me the weirdest look, as if I had performed some kind of magic. Despite this talent, I somehow always manage to bump into the corners of tables. Story 27. Being a good judge of character has always been a bit of a mixed blessing for me. Over the years, I've had to bite my tongue countless times because I could see the flaws and red flags in people my friends were drawn to. It's a tough position to be in, knowing that someone isn't a good person or has issues that will inevitably hurt someone I care about, yet watching my friend walk right into the situation, oblivious. There have been dozens of instances where I've felt this uneasy premonition about someone, and more often than not, those feelings have proven to be spot on. The person in question almost always ends up doing exactly what I feared they would. It's frustrating, to say the least, but I've learned to hold back, knowing that sometimes people need to experience things for themselves to truly understand. I remember one friend from a long time ago. We were close, and she trusted my judgment implicitly. One day, out of the blue, she asked me if I could read minds. Her question caught me off guard, and I wasn't quite sure how to respond. It made me think about the nature of my intuition, and whether it was something more than just being observant. I've never claimed to have any supernatural abilities, but I suppose being in tune with people's behaviors and intentions can seem that way to others. There's a part of me that's curious about how others perceive this ability of mine. I'd love to meet someone who has the same skill, like the original poster I read about, and ask them, "What kind of character do I have? How do you see me?" It would be fascinating to get that kind of feedback from someone who understands what it's like to be so attuned to others. Despite the challenges and the occasional suspicion it brings, being able to read people has been incredibly helpful. It's allowed me to navigate social situations with more ease and to protect myself and my friends from potential harm. Hearing about other people with similar skills is always interesting. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this, and it reinforces the idea that intuition, when honed and respected, can be a powerful tool.